Hello, welcome to The Constant, where the only constant is change and we go for a swim in the deep blue of business, technology, and culture. Welcome to episode 1, Progress, Wealth, and Sustainable Abundance. I'm Brad, here with Dziebel, Kapa, Lenkov, and Andrey Kunov. As the host, I'll ask the questions. Someone has to herd the cats. This week, we're talking about the notion of sustainable abundance, something that Elon Musk has been talking about a great deal. First, what is sustainable abundance? And second, if we're all better off than our ancestors were not even that long ago, why aren't we happier? Kapa, you had a lot of passion for this topic, so let's start with point 1 and talk a bit about sustainable abundance and why it's already here.
Well, first of all, at least the vision that Musk wanted us to see very soon in the near future, people will be able to do anything they want and have anything they want. Kind of with the use of robotics, cheap energy, life will become even more smooth than it is now, and all your dreams will be attainable. I think it's a very beautiful thought if your dreams can be fulfilled with cheap energy and a robot helper. I think in some ways we're already there. We throw away about 50% of our food in the US. And that's not like leftover restaurant food. That's like uneaten, unopened food that just spoils or expires before it's consumed. So we definitely have food, and we definitely live very much better lives than people were living 100 years ago. Some people say that the poorest people today live better than Rockefeller lived 100 years ago, meaning simply just what they can buy or have for free in the sense of medicine, transportation, education, etc.
So is he, paint a picture for me, is he saying that with AI and with the sort of technological advances that we've got coming, we're going to be able to be more efficient with food waste, and we're going to be able to be more, precise and thoughtful about how we use resources? Or is he just saying we're going to have resources at our fingertips for everyone?
Well, we already have these resources, right? It's a question of currently, most people don't think that they're wealthy. Even people who actually are in the top 10% do not feel that they are wealthy. And of course, people in the bottom 90% definitely don't feel that they're wealthy. His vision is that with the use of robots, with energy becoming more accessible, you won't have to think, oh, I have to save up for this thing that I really want. You will just be able to have it because all of these things will be just more available to you, because as it is now, computers are much cheaper than they were when they first came out. Many things are much cheaper and much more accessible. He's just saying we're going to see an acceleration of that trend across all areas of life.
So he's really talking about things like technology of clean water and antibiotics and cell phones. There's definitely other ways.
He did not mention, he didn't mention those things. He's talking more about like, you don't have to have a nanny for your kids. Your robot will be the nanny. You don't need to get a dog walker. Your robot will be the dog walker. Basically, he's saying that many of the things that we think about having to pay for now and that are expensive for us and that make life difficult. Like people think, I don't want to have a kid because I can't pay for daycare, or I have an elderly parent. It's hard to pay for the care of the elderly parent. Things that are being done by humans will be done by robots, but it will be accessible in the sense that the robot will not be expensive and the energy to run the robot will become very cheap. That's all he's saying. I don't want to put words in his mouth. He wasn't
fair, and I didn't mean to either. So German, you had some thoughts about that, right? Like there's GDP, there's purchasing power, there's wealth as the ability to get things done, right? That's a very classic definition of wealth. But labor is wealth, let's say. So let's talk about that a little bit.
Well, what made me really pause when I found out the broader vision of Musk, is the implication that was also voiced on multiple websites that somehow the average American right now lives just as well, as J.D. Rockefeller of the past, or maybe even better, based on such a metric as the number of innovations that are now democratized and available to all, and that were not around when J.D. Rockefeller was around. That gave me a pause, because the other part of the internet is talking about a completely different thing, saying, that the wealth of Musk and the wealth of J.D. Rockefeller, if corrected for inflation, as compared to the GDP of the U.S., are pretty much similar. They both, kind of fluctuate within 1% to 2% of the GDP, their wealth, their net worth. So if we put the two together, it turns out, that the logic would tell us, that the average American is just as wealthy as Elon Musk. If Elon Musk is just as wealthy as J.D. Rockefeller. And that's clearly not true. So it means, we are missing something here, that's critical. We probably need to differentiate, and that's a good historical moment to differentiate, between consumer goods and what innovation brings in terms of the consumer value and how it equalizes consumers or us as consumers versus whether this kind of revolution, can equalize us as citizens, as people who are either workers, employees, or business owners. So this is the division that has been brought up multiple times by the social scientists. We maybe as consumers feeling the equality, but as citizens, as people, as people who, whether we hire someone, we cannot. J.D. Rockefeller could, Elon Musk can, but we cannot. So the average American, keep measured, by the amount of innovation that they consume as consumers. Yeah, probably, because Elon Musk probably uses the same iPhone, as I use. Maybe iPhone 14 15 or 16, or maybe he's not using any iPhone whatsoever, ironically, because he doesn't want to, because he considers that to be bad. So when we focus on our consumer choices, then the picture looks one way. But if we focus on the labor and the relationship between labor and power, the situation will be completely different. So those two things cannot be compared, like as apples to apples.
I just want to comment that this is exactly what he's talking about. The labor of robots will become almost free. So it's not humans you're hiring anymore. You're replacing that labor by robots. So you become as wealthy as these people.
I think that's what we're boiling it down to. But I think that's what we're boiling it down to is, are we talking about material goods? And, that's where I was really going, things like antibiotics and clean water and stuff. If we're talking about labor, then it's different, right? Like pharaohs were as rich as, any king because they had people they could order around. And I think the argument here is that we can replace that sort of labor, people labor.
Yeah.
And the question becomes, how sustainable is that? So Andrey, you have some thoughts about like the sustainability factor of all of this, and really where's it all going, and how can AI help with sort of making this? I don't really have a horse in this race, but the difference between technology and labor, for example, like if it were, Kapa mentioned like dog walking. I like walking my dog, but if I can't do it, it's nice to know that somebody can do it for me, kind of thing. So the question becomes, what's it replacing and how sustainable it is?
Well, I would start first from recognizing kind of the fact that we do live in the age of abundance. And if we look back into, let's say, 100 years, lots of clear signs that our civilization is moving forward with creating lots of things in a very abundant manner, right? Like, let's just take a look at the massive poverty reduction, for example, over the last 100 years, right? It's indisputable that even just over the last 20 years, approximately 700 million people have been pulled out of poverty, right? In that regard, we live in a more abundant world. You look at the life expectancy, reduced child mortality around the world. You look at unprecedented technological access. Even African peasants would be using mobile smartphones for communicating with each other. Greater access to knowledge and culture through internet. All of that are the signs of abundance, what Kapa was referring to, right? What I'm interested in is to explore what I would call abundance paradox. Is that despite the fact that we have all of that, there are signs of where people actually feel more poor and more diminished. Like you look at the massive and growing inequality, for example. It's just amazing that all of us are becoming more abundant and yet we feel more poor psychologically. We're insecure about the future of our jobs. I would blame severe environmental costs around. We can debate a lot what's happening with the environment, but it's pretty clear that environment is changing and not by most accounts for the better in the future. There's a lot of stress and burnout that people experience now, and would call it time poverty, right? I mean, we have more abundance of time on the one hand, and yet we all feel poor with our time. And I mentioned the deficit of modern work, right? On the one hand, there is abundance of resources, and yet we're all feel a lot insecure about our jobs right now, especially with AI coming soon to replace all of us or most of us. All of this cost of living crisis, essentially, that we all psychologically at least experience right now. That's what I would define as an abundance paradox. And how do you resolve that? That's a big question for me personally. Is that really sustainable? But it's not just about sustainability. It's also about how do we adapt to the age of abundance. And I don't see that people are adapting very well to this age.
It's certainly when I look at things like the Jetsons and stuff, like the vision of the future that we saw in cartoons as a kid, there was this idea that technology would make us free. And instead, people feel like, I study doctors very closely. And the more technology doctors have, the busier they get, and the more they're working at the edge of task overload, because the EHR is ringing at them, and they have paperwork burdens, and they have throughput, and they have throughput requirements, how many patients they see, and they have oversight. And there've been study after study that doctors who used to sort of be in control of their time feel completely out of control of their time, and that's stressing them out. And that's a field I'm familiar with because I've studied it for 30 years. But Kapa, you have some, like, we're richer, we're better off. We don't die as young. Now, when I say we four all got PhDs at Stanford. So we're still like at the top of the food pyramid when it comes to things like education, recognizing that there are people living in extreme poverty throughout the world, and even in the United States, and even in my county in Orange County, New York. Most people are doing better. Most people in America have clean water. They're living longer. We are not happier. And that's whether or not people want to argue, are we better?
Exactly.
We're definitely not happier. So
that's exactly right.
Why aren't we happier?
Exactly. Yeah. I mean, let me just add to that very quickly before Kapa jumps. You look at the amount of depression, like a rate of depression that people are experiencing, anxiety, loneliness, drug use, and all of this pervasive insecurity. It's just amazing that most of us are experiencing that, right? The age of abundance. And how would you explain that? That's what I'm really curious about.
Well, what I like, if I may interject for a second. So what I found fascinating about Musk, and that's kind of an old story, but still fascinates me, that technology, like you said, Brad, is supposed to make us free. And Musk believes, that by virtue of what he is doing, the social value of what he is doing is already there in the products, in the technology that he is producing. So if we look back at the Rockefeller times, so he would create his wealth, through oil, kind of stereotypically, but then he would redistribute that wealth, through universities, through foundations, to support medical research, support climate research, all sorts of science, kind of in social sciences, and support minorities. So he had to redistribute his wealth, through philanthropy. Musk does not believe in philanthropy. He believes, that what he's already doing with his primary business already is philanthropy in a sense. The question, whether business can generate that additional value by virtue of it being a business primarily focused on products and generating wealth, can it generate, happiness? Or we need to redistribute, that wealth in such a way as to identify the pain points in society where that unhappiness lives, and target it, with the money that were generated by the people like Musk.
So let's stay out of the psychological for a second, and let's Kapa. Why aren't we happy?
Yeah, but I just to make sure that we Rockefeller started working on charity after his company was broken apart by antitrust regulation, and he was basically forced to leave industry. So we don't know what's going to happen.
He was engaged in philanthropy since the age of 16. He became a full-time philanthropist by the age of 50, and he lived until 98. So happily, he had also got quite a bit of longevity. So that's kind of something to keep in mind.
Yeah. Anyway, just Musk also donates billions of dollars to philanthropic projects, kind of on the same level. And but I do like the parallel of Musk and Rockefeller, because if you read what some people say about Rockefeller, was that it wasn't just like oil, but he was creating something similar to what Musk's vision is, because through providing basically energy through oil. I mean, it's the same story, that humans need energy in order to thrive, because they need to travel, they need to build things, all of these things that require energy. And actually, I think I don't know if anyone's done this, but it's a great PhD project comparing the innovations that Rockefeller initiated and Musk initiated. But back to the question of happiness, I think it's important that, what Andrey said, I think it's actually the fact that we have so much free time. Most people don't know how to fill that time. And that emptiness of not knowing what to do with free time is what creates the feeling of loneliness. Brad, you mentioned the pharaohs who had unlimited slaves to build pyramids, but it wasn't every pharaoh doing it. It took a very long time for the first pyramids to be built, and they were not built actually by the pharaoh. They were built by a brilliant engineer who is very similar to Rockefeller and Musk, Imhotep, who we still remember. If you watch the mummy movies, he's the mummy. He was kind of like this Renaissance man who was doing this amazing research, and he just was like, let's build a pyramid. He had to build several before he got it right. And that's the point, that you see many individuals with huge resources that are not doing anything with them because they don't know what to do with them. The creativity that it takes to think what to do with extra time, extra resources, all that stuff, that is not a very normal trait that humans have. So we always look for guidance. Well, just generally, people look for guidance from society, from their families, from the universities, whatever it is, how to spend their time and money. And when suddenly you have a ton of it and you don't know what to do with it, that creates unhappiness, I think.
So I have a friend who describes it this way. There are certain people who are good in the turns and bad in the straightaways. Like when things are bad, they're good. And when things are going well, they make problems for themselves. Is that the human condition, that like when we have enough, we just start looking around and go, what can I mess with?
Do self-sabotage.
Most of us are like that, I would say. I think what Kapa pointed out, that people are not very good at when they actually do have a lot of free time. It's a very interesting explanation for this. I would also add to that, there is this hedonic treadmill research done on lottery winners, for example. Like, just imagine that we're all lottery winners right now with our free time that we were afforded by this age of abundance. And now when people win lotteries, very quickly after that, they get happy, and like 3 months down the road, they become like drug addicts, or at least unhappy with what they have won. Is it the destiny for all of us? Like, most of us actually are good when we are pressured by our bosses or by circumstances of our life, by poverty, to actually excel, because there is no this, I would say, hedonic adaptation. You cannot adapt to suffering. You keep suffering, right? And to get out of that situation, we put a lot of effort into getting it out of that. But when we actually do become rich, at least with our time and maybe some resources like this abundance, all of a sudden it starts playing against us, right? Like, we are all lottery winners right now, and we're all down that path of, suffering from that. Isn't that like paradoxical?
Yeah, I think that's a great parallel. The lottery winners, usually winning the lottery does not make your life better. So
there's
No, I'm willing to try and test it on myself.
Yeah, I think we'll all sign up for that experiment. There's definitely a couple of analyses of that. One is earned money feels different than windfall money. Like, if you build a company and you put in the hard work and you see it to fruition, there's a sense of accomplishment there, versus you buy a scratch off, it's $1 billion and your life changes overnight. I think there's also something about a loss of purpose and community that they talk about a lot, that you go from living amongst your neighbors to having nothing in common with your neighbors. And if just let me expand on that for 1 second. There was a very compelling article I read long time ago, and I think the Washington Post, that everyone feels they're middle class. If you're rich, if you're poor, if you're middle class, everyone thinks they're middle class. And the reason is they live in neighborhoods where they're middle class because some people have a little more money than them and some people have a little less money than them. But basically everybody's living in the same sort of financial zip code, as it were. I've lived in Palo Alto. It's very wealthy. Everybody feels middle class. They're not, right? I now live in rural New York where everybody feels middle class. They're not according to the demographics, not according to the, the money sort of algorithms and stuff, but they feel that way because they sit in the middle of their social circle. And I think there's something about getting plucked out of your social environment and thrown into a new one. We all say we want it, but it would be very, very lonely to have $1 billion and no longer know if people liked you for you. And that's what people report. And so this gets to that idea of like purpose, like what do we do with our time and why are we here? So Kapa, I'll go back to you and then we'll just go around the horn, right? Like, does Musk have anything to say about abundance and purpose, or is he just providing purpose? Because just to finish the question, it seems like every time we give people abundance, they just make a mess out of it, right? So what is it that we need to do to make this abundance functional for us, even if we're just wired to need some hardship, like?
Yeah, allow me to rotate a little bit away from Musk because he's, more of an engineer and not a social scientist.
Absolutely. Yep.
So I think actually this touches on a subject that's very close to my heart, the thing I wrote my dissertation on, and that's social hierarchy. So we are hierarchical animals, and that even if magically aliens came and give every individual on planet Earth the same amount of stuff or money or whatever, we would very quickly still form ourselves into hierarchical structures, the most attractive ones, the smartest ones, it doesn't matter. And that's something that's impossible to get rid of without a lot of genetic engineering in the animal part of us, right? Whenever we enter a room, we use subconscious kind of cues to see who is the top boss in the room, and it's not necessarily the wealthiest person or whatever. So that's what we want ultimately, because it's programmed into us that the person at the top of the hierarchy has the best access to mates, to resources. Even if we have these resources, we can't change that programming within us. So yeah, that's kind of a problem. That's not something we're going to get rid of because it's a part of our human nature. I love Star Trek, the show, and in Star Trek: The Next Generation, they talk a lot about in their society there's no more money, but yet people are finding purpose and some are happier and less happy. And they do talk about how people move up the hierarchy and down the hierarchy by their accomplishments, by educating themselves, doing great things, and that's what causes others to respect.
Yeah, German, I want to throw it to you in 1 second, but I just want to reply to something because it is funny because you and I are science fiction fans, and like I said, I study doctors, I study medicine a lot. I'm a social scientist.
I'm not a science fiction fan. Kapa is.
I was saying Kapa and I are, right?
Oh,
like
yeah,
I know everyone doesn't, but one of the interesting things I always point out is, what will the future of medicine be like, right? When you look at Bones and the original Star Trek, and everybody who listens to this, you've seen at least one episode of the original Star Trek, right? With Spock and the pointy ears and all that stuff. If you remember, Bones was their doctor, and he didn't really do a lot of doctoring, like not the way we think of it. The machines did all the doctoring. All he did was talk to his patients. If they were sick, he'd put them on this bed and the bed would diagnose them, and then he'd run this thing over them and it would cure them. And that was that. Or they'd put them in a tent. Like, he didn't actually do any procedures. And what's interesting is I'll often start talks with, like, what's the future of medicine? Is it Bones McCoy, where the technology allows the people to reconnect? Or is it RoboDocs, where there are no people, where there is no Bones McCoy, and you just interact with a machine? And what we seem to be talking about now is much more interacting with a machine, which does solve some problems, but then all the doctors who get purpose from being a doctor no longer have that purpose. So it's a sort of double-edged sword. And I always think of it as like we've replaced drudgery with cat videos. We didn't replace washing dishes by hand with something productive. Most of us use that time and just watch the equivalent of cat videos. So it's not necessarily that we're going to be making good choices with our free time. But German, like you had some strong thoughts about that as well, in terms of psychology of joy.
I think what we also see, in addition to inequality, and I agree with Kapa, it's a very important driver. Inequality, creates wealth. Without inequality, there is no wealth generation. But then, throughout history, there are ways, by which, that wealth and that inequality, gets democratized. That's a constant push, even the conversation we just started, with the fact, that an average American right now has exactly the same iPhone, as Elon Musk, the richest man in the world has, and the richest man in the world of the past, Rockefeller, did not have it. So there is that. So we don't pocket, all of the innovations that we have, all the symbols of our inequality and try to kind of create, those little clubs. We create them for a little bit, but then, we break them apart in order for all that wealth, that those clubs, create, get spread out across. And I think those are just constantly, those two forces, are acting against each other, in collaboration with each other, in collision with each other. But both of them are present, the strive for inequality, and at the same time, the drive, for redistribution. And the redistribution just takes different forms.
So why aren't we happier now that we have more? We have Elon Musk's phone. But
it means the moment, when we created a lot of wealth, now this wealth needs to be redistributed, so that the pain points, the psychological, the social pain points, that have been created by this wealth generation, they need to be covered up through the redistribution of that wealth. So the question becomes whether we need to use the same technology to cover up on those pain points. Say, create a robot who will be your therapist, your constantly available AI therapist for you, and that will solve that. Or these are human connections, that are necessary in order to compensate, for that creation of wealth, that opened up, the gaps, creating loneliness and unhappiness.
Andrey, go ahead.
Interesting. Huh. Well, I'm kind of still thinking about how do we square, those two different trends around abundance, right? Materially, we're more abundant than ever, but psychologically, we feel more insecure and impoverished, more than I guess ever before. My parents did not feel it that way, even though objectively, they lived in the Soviet Union, their salaries were way smaller than my income right now. So I'm just thinking about that. And one explanation that comes to mind for me is what I guess you, Brad, mentioned, is what I would call like relative comparison, that we do not really judge our well-being in absolute terms. We judge it relative to others. And social media, all of these new technology, abundance, by the way, in technology at least, it kind of amplifies this by giving us curated, idealized versions of life when we look at the accounts of other people, right? And it often creates these unrealistic benchmarks in life that fosters, and I would say, envy, inadequacy, and many of us would feel FOMO, fear of missing out, when we look at the lives of other people. So I guess it all comes down to psychological state of our mind, that the external world is changing way faster than we can adapt to it. And I think that there is a bit of a delay inside of us to adapt to the world of abundance. That's how I feel, at least, about myself, that I need to I need to catch up a lot with all of this abundance that's happening around me. I'm not going to become a Rockefeller any time in my life, obviously, but if I felt, I guess, more capable of converting all of these external resources into internal abundance, that would be something nice to have.
Well, I was just going to say, just continuing, I totally agree with what Andrey is saying. One of the problems is that instinct of, comparing ourselves to others. I don't know if you've seen the famous capuchin monkey experiments by Professor Dziebel, where he shows, two monkeys, first they're receiving cucumbers for a particular task, and then one of them starts getting a grape, and the one still getting cucumbers just freaks out, even though a minute ago he was perfectly happy with the cucumber, right? So it's an animal instinct, right? And so, Andrey, when you talk about kind of adjusting these ways that we kind of feel happy or not happy compared to others, it's a very deep instinct, but I would say there's a lot of deep instincts we had that we've been able to at least suppress, right? You're angry at someone, you kill them, or you desire someone, you might force them to do something they don't want, those kind of things. As society has matured, we've said, yeah, we get it. You got these feelings inside of you, but just you can't follow through on them. And part of it is not just society telling you, but you yourself do not want to be kind of the animalistic person that follows through on these animal tendencies. I think as soon as we recognize this feeling of the thing we call fairness, to be one of these bad animal instincts, like the desire to kill, for example, I think we will get really far, because we will never, ever, ever have fairness. Like, even if you have pure distribution of wealth where everyone gets the same amount of wealth, somebody will be born a little smarter, a little prettier, a little whatever. Mom will hug them more. Have you seen, there was an attempt at France to not let parents do homework with their kids or read to their kids, because some kids were getting help from their parents after school and others weren't, and there was an attempt to kind of make things work.
But I think, we may be falling into contradiction here. Because if we do not acknowledge, that other people have more than we do, we, the collective we, wouldn't we just stop evolving? Isn't the drive and an awareness of inequality, and it makes us evolve to achieve better things, not just to catch up, but overtake the Joneses? And then kind of, that creates a dynamic that's important. We don't necessarily stop.
The Bible, right? Do not covet thy neighbor's ass.
Yeah, and everything in the Bible is
right.
Yeah, I will point out that the 10 Commandments are there. There isn't like remember to breathe, right? The 10 Commandments are the things that we find difficult to not do. Like we do covet our neighbor's stuff, and we do want to murder that guy who cut us off, and so right. But I think. Sorry, just to get to German's point a little bit, I think there is a bit of tension, right? Like I tried to teach my children that the biggest gift you can have is having enough.
Yeah,
right.
That's
like
a good point.
Andrey's point, the hedonistic treadmill, there's a money treadmill, there's, we've all known spectacularly successful people who were just disasters in their personal lives. I'm sure of it. I don't even know you guys that well, and I know it's true because it's just a truism. You can be spectacularly successful in a lot of ways, but you're still human. And, at the end of the day, I think one of the concerns is, how do we turn off, to Kapa's point, some of these drives, right? Like, you want to be at the point where you're striving for something, but not to the point where you're willing to kill to get it, or not to the point where you're willing to, treat your colleagues poorly, right? I mean, there's a lot of articles on the sociopath in the corner office where if there's 4 people going for a promotion, the one who's likely to get it is the one who will knife the other 3 in the back. And so most CEOs, they're not sociopaths, right? But they display certain sociopathic tendencies because you don't get to that office without them. We don't want to get rid of it because we like our CEOs to be a little bit aggressive. They have to know what they're doing, but we don't want them to be so aggressive that they're sociopathic maniacs. And there's a sort of balancing act. And one of the things I just want to leave us with is a question I'll ask you guys, right? So we have this social deficit. I think you've all mentioned it in one way or another, but there's this idea that back in the Soviet Union, back in New York State, where my mom wasn't born back then, but in the late 30s, early 40s, all that stuff, you see these movies, there was something of the solidarity of scarcity. If you needed something, you would go get it from your neighbor. I have never once knocked on my neighbor's door for a cup of sugar. It's just as easy for me to go get it from the store. And as a result, I don't really have the same network of neighbors that my mom did growing up, and that your parents had growing up, and that there's something about this abundance that is leaving us alone. And one of my fears is that we are going to let AI sort of slip into that role. And the problem with that is your neighbors keep you honest. If you get a little bit too high on yourself, your neighbors are going to point it out, right? Whereas your AI is your imaginary friend, and they're going to go, Brad, you're so smart and handsome. Of course you can do that,
Depends on your prompt, Brad. It depends on your prompt.
it's
Yeah.
it's just a fear of mine, right? But one of the things that we see is that social prescribing. The doctors are starting to tell people, join a club, join a birding club, join Boy Scouts, put your kid in Boy Scouts. I was a Boy Scout leader. We had 6 kids on the autism spectrum in my troop at one point because it was really good for them. It was a social interaction. It was a routine social interaction. They got to know all the other kids. All the other kids got to know them and their quirks. And so it worked out pretty well. And that seems to be disappearing into this world of like, I've got my television, I've got my iPhone, I've got my cat videos, I've got what I need. I don't need my neighbors. And that's actually counterproductive to us because I know we're hierarchical, but we're also social. So that's the last time. I'm just going to put it out there. I'm going to let each one of you react to that idea, right? Andrey, you've raised your hand.
Yeah, very quickly, Brad. I really liked what you said. But I would also add to that, that even when we don't look at each other, I would say there is also what I would call rising expectations as another explanation why we don't feel abundant in the age of abundance, right? Society gets richer, yes, but those things that used to be considered luxuries in the past are not luxuries anymore, right? We're looking into expecting more and more and more. I'm thinking of my parents again, who used to, have a car. Like my father bought his car when he was in the mid of his age, and that was a huge luxury for him, because he earned it. They
Right.
earned it only after working for a long time. I don't care about cars at all in my life. I don't consider that to be a luxury at all. I mean, I bet you guys too, like you don't care about cars much in your life, right? We're looking into having something bigger. I mean, if somebody gave me, I guess, a helicopter, I would consider that to be a luxury, or a yacht.
Right.
Even though I'm not like really actively trying to get them, they would still qualify as luxuries for me. So these rising expectations, I think that's another reason why we are never happy. And maybe that's a good thing that we're never happy, because if we became happy during this age of abundance, most of us would probably stop doing what humans are designed for, is to push the boundaries. So I think it's actually a good thing that we are not satisfied in the midst of all of this abundance that we have.
But Brad, what you said about the AI being your friend and just telling you how great you look, that's not my experience. Like maybe you and I are asking the AI different things, but I oftentimes run up against the AI saying, well, I'm not going to answer that question because it's unethical or whatever, right?
Right.
It gives you some hints what I'm asking. I'm kind of pushing the boundaries here, but I think as AI products start getting designed generally the way they are now, but more specifically to say be involved in child rearing or be as a companion, I think that will be a very big component, helping guide people both in kind of making good decisions in the sense of the moral scale, but also helping to guide people, as you were saying, to join clubs or to interact with their neighbors, all this stuff. I mean, even just out of self-interest, birth rates are dropping astronomically. Some people are afraid robots are going to, try to get rid of humans. They don't have to do anything. They just have to sit back and let us, stop reproducing, which is what we're doing, right? So if anything, I think there's we'll kind of form this symbiotic relationship where, yeah, maybe we will need robots in order to, meet new partners or get better relationships with our neighbors. So
my teenagers don't, well, that's not true, but I know a lot of people who don't seem to know how to meet each other without the help of technology. If you don't meet each other at school, which is where, 2 of my kids have sort of met their partners, but if you don't meet each other at school, how do you meet? I do not know. It seems to be all app mediated. And again, like that's okay. I mean, you used to meet at church. You used to marry the girl next door or the guy down the road or something. So the world's gotten bigger.
There's perfect statistic for the Brad. They showed like the progression where people used to meet in the 1950s, and those were like church, school, neighborhood. And now it's mostly online. People already kind of really craving that moment of exploring the bigger world and finding a partner that's otherwise is not reachable within their physical distance. So
I mean,
without that, like the one that's too close to them is not as attractive because there is no moment, of discovery and surprise and finding someone what's out there because there is that abundance, of mates now.
certainly the world has gotten smaller, and I tell this story a lot. When I was at Stanford, I went to Taiwan for 2 weeks in the 90s, just on a visit, and no one knew where I was. The minute I got on the airplane to the minute I landed back in the United States, I didn't talk to anybody. And my son went to Taiwan, studied there for a while when he was in college, and he was texting me from the plane. Like I knew where he was every second of every minute of every day if I wanted to while he was there. And it's the other side of the world. And it's just night and day in one generation. And I think some of that is very disorienting, but it does sort of lead to this idea of abundance. There's abundance of contact. There's abundance of capability and movement and people. And I think one of the problems what do I know? I've been married a long time, but like one of the problems with Tinder is there's an abundance of choice. Like why settle? Just keep swiping. And eventually, like to your point, it's a hedonistic escalator where you just need continuously larger doses of hedonism to feel anything. This is something that rock stars talk about a lot, by the way. When they finally sober up, they're like, yeah, at the end, it was crazy because you just can't continually satisfy that need for novelty without getting to extremes. So I do wonder where we're going with all of this, but I think replacing drudgery is a good thing. Replacing drudgery with cat videos is a questionable thing, but we'll get better at it. So, all right. This has been really interesting. So last question, yes or no. Do we think we are going in the right direction or the wrong one with abundance? And I don't really have any question behind that question. I just figured I'd throw it out there. So everybody gets 30 seconds in this last bit. So go ahead. Who wants to go first?
So let me go first. So I think, humans, always seek challenge, and abundance, is one of those challenges. Poverty is another challenge, the opposite one. So I think, so any extreme of our behavior, any extreme of our life, is ultimately, very useful and healthy for us. Because when we face abundance, we at the same time become aware of our own limits as humans. I mean, our own longevity, no matter how we try, even with the technology right now, to extend our lifespan, we're still, very, 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 very mortal. And that abundance reminds us, because we don't have time, to do all of that. And we need to be very choiceful and we need to be very focused. It means, we need to create barriers. We need to create constraints in our own behavior. So, and I think when we face that new abundance of the Musks of the world, it will provoke us, to respond appropriately, and open up, our own kind of internal resources, that we were not aware of.
Well, I agree with what German said. I think the human condition ultimately is to push boundaries, right? If nothing else, that's why humans, that's how humans are so different from animals. Animals are adapting to this world. We are adapting the world to ourselves. So in the short term, I think it's going to be bad because, anytime when we're going through changes, we are experiencing those changes as something that is, not causing us too much happiness. But in the long term, we adapt. I think that's what people are really good about. And I think in the long term, we will get, our children and the children of our children will get used to all of this change and will emerge as, superhumans. It's not about superhumanism. It's just I'm saying that, they will be superhumans compared to who we are, as we are to our ancestors.
I'm a techno optimist, so I don't think it's going to be our children's children. I think it's us, and definitely our children. I think the generation that was born already with technology, kind of from a very young age, they're going to adapt very easily to it, and I think that. Again, it's going to depend on how we design these, robot assistants, etc. But I think there's a lot of untapped human potential, and I actually think that AI is the way to kind of help us realize our full potential, because we can of course tell it, go away, I just want to lie in bed and watch TV. But if we say, hey, I'm not sure, right? I'm not sure what to do, what help me figure out the next step or an interesting activity or whatever. I think that's what it's there for, because you don't have to feel embarrassed in front of it. A lot of times we feel embarrassment saying this, even to our therapists, right? But this robot, you can say anything to it, and it's just there to help. So I think it's very soon. I think within 5 years, we'll all basically be able to have a robot the same way we have a car. We'll be renting it for $300 a month. And it's just, it's just like with the pharaohs. Like if you have a new idea, building a pyramid that no one's built before, you'll be able to do it. And the AI will actually prompt you.
If you're going to build a pyramid, get a permit. That's all I'm going to say, because we may have AI, but we'll still have the building inspector too. So
the AI will write the permit for you. That's the problem with writing a permit. Won't be a
permit too. Yes. Dude, this sounds perfect. I've always wanted. I cannot wait. Yeah. So, well, this has been great. Again, thank you all on behalf of Dziebel, Andrey Kunov, Kapa, Lenkov, and myself, Brad Davidson. This is The Constant, and it's been a pleasure speaking with you.